Let's start, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, everyone. Today, we are very pleased to welcome two guest speakers who are conference interpreters from the other corner of Africa, South Africa, and they are going to share with us their experience as conference interpreters. The exchange is an informal exchange as agreed initially. So we are going to engage in that exchange, trying to get as much as we can from their personal experiences. We are going to ask questions, very practical questions, and I know that they are going to share very practical tips and very personal stories from their experience or experiences. I know that students are more keen on knowing the personal side of the story rather than the public part or phase of it. Each one of us has his or her own story, and the story builds experience. So we would like to see, to hear, and to experience with both of them their way of going about the challenges of interpreting and that life, the life as a conference interpreter, but also the life in that very narrow and intimate space of the booth. And we are going to discuss behavioral aspects. We are going to discuss the do's and the don'ts in the booth, what to do, what not to do. And also, we are going to discuss the specificity of the conference interpreting market in that corner. I would like to urge you and encourage you to ask questions. There are no limits and no restrictions to the questions you may ask or the comments you can make, provided that they do not cross the boundary. And there are two boundaries: the boundary of privacy or to privacy, and another boundary to confidential information, because you know the interpreters are sometimes required to sign non-confidentiality agreements and not to share some information related to their clients. So we are going to listen to our two guests, Addie Morgado from South Africa, and she has almost 25 years of experience, and she is translating and she is having a combination, a language combination that involves Portuguese, English, French, and Spanish, and she is going to talk about that. We are also delighted to welcome the other guest, her booth partner on many occasions, Carla Pinheiro, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. But I would like to ask her about the meaning of Pinheiro. Let's start from the very beginning, and I would like to ask you, Carla, about the meaning of your name. You have the floor.
Thank you, Hammoud. Pinheiro actually means pine tree, and the story tells us that it was during that my ancestors were actually Jewish in the Iberian Peninsula, and during the persecution that took place in the Iberian Peninsula, basically in Spain and to a lesser extent in Portugal, that the Christians were forced, I beg your pardon, the Jewish people were forced to convert to Christianism. That was Christianity. That was the first step. The second step is if they didn't, they had forced baptisms in the river of Lisbon. And finally, those Jewish people who did not want to undergo any of the two steps, they changed their names. So you will find that a lot of the Portuguese names refer to animals and to trees. You know, so Pinheiro is a pine tree. There's also the oak tree. There's the pear tree. There's the fox. There's the wolf. There's all of those names that give you an indication of the history of those people in the Iberian Peninsula. But for me, my personal story is that even though I'm only 1 meter 50 something or other, I think that Pinheiro means that I'm very tall, very strong, and sometimes very inflammable. So that's my personal interpretation of my surname. Pleased to meet you all. We cannot hear you, Hammouda.
Sorry, my mic was muted. Yeah. So thank you very much, Carla, for this explanation and this story. By the way, Jews and Muslims shared the same painful experience in the Iberian Peninsula. Yeah. And so many of them were forced also to convert to Christianity. Well, perhaps this is also a good question to ask about the roots and how the roots can impact the career of people, and they might choose one career over another, especially when they are travelers. Some of the Muslims, Christians, and Jews, they have been persecuted over centuries, and they would like to have a skill that can travel with them. Not language skill is one that can travel, but not other skills like being a carpenter or any other skill. So this is really a very good question to ask, perhaps. How about Addie? Morgado, does it have any meaning in Portuguese?
Yes, yes. Morgado in the medieval times, from there on, Morgado was the first son of the wealthier people. So these were the people in the communities who mostly had the land, that owned the land, and the other people worked for the landlord as such. And so these people always had land, and of course they had power. And their eldest son would normally inherit the position as such, the name and the wealth. So, and then it became a surname, because when it got to my father, he was definitely on the wrong side of the family. He is Morgado without the title, without the land, but originally that is where the name comes from. There is a very famous book in Portuguese literature, because you have the Morgado, which is the eldest son, but there were families, these landlords, these water was called. There is one very, very important book in our Portuguese literature, which is precisely about one such lady. And it was always a prescribed work while I was at school. I'm not sure it is still now, but it's still one of. So that's what it means.
Excellent. Let's start from the very beginning, your beginnings. how you made it into this area of conference interpreting. Can you share with us stories, your both stories, that your road to the booth? Let me start with you, Addie.
Okay, so I started my working career as a medical technologist. I trained as a medical technologist and I fled Angola in 1975 during the war, and I worked as a medical technologist in South Africa for many, many years. But for personal reasons, because I got divorced and so on, I had to find other ways of earning a living. I've always been very, very interested in the Portuguese language. It's still my big passion. So in my family-in-law, there was an engineer who in 1992 produced in South Africa the very first completely solid-state electronic prepayment meter. And it wasn't like the prepayment meters of the United Kingdom and Canada, which were already involved in that technology, but it was a meter that was made specifically for the South African market. So it wasn't a smart meter like the UK one or the Canadian, which you could introduce information and retrieve. This one was just an introduction of information. It was specifically made for the South African market. In 1992, he decided to market it in Brazil because the markets were and are very similar, very, very similar. We have our townships, which are very similar to the favelas in Brazil. And so it was his idea, and he asked me to translate the first letter about the meter, about marketing it in Brazil, and that's how it started. So I ended up my career as a medical technologist, and I started one in marketing. So for most of the 90s, until the end of the 90s, from 1992, I traveled to South America, and of course, after intensive training on these meters, which I then knew back to front, and we traveled to South America, first to Brazil, and of course, because of the Mercosur, then to the other countries, Colombia, which I loved, Argentina, which I loved. So I worked with Argentina, Colombia, Brazil, Chile, with those markets until the end of the 90s. So I did liaison and consecutive interpreting about these meters. So that was great. And of course, I translated the documentation, the documents, the communication. And that's how I started. I would still work in the corporate world. I was employed by the company, but I used all my leave to do conferences, to do traveling, to do marketing. And for a while, I was also involved with the French market, the Ivory Coast, Gabon. We also marketed because the markets are really similar. And that's how it evolved. And then that company closed. I worked with the traveling incentive market for Europe. And for 1 year, the company then closed. And then I started interpreting and continue with translations, and I started interpreting on my own, freelancing in the year 2000. And I've never looked back. So we as I said to Hammouda, we get our clients, it goes by word of mouth, by the quality of your work. And so it's been an unbelievable career. And I like it more and more as the time goes. And for us, it's a challenge right now.
It is.
To introduce new technologies, new situations. So yeah, so it is really an interesting career.
It is. So and the road leading to it is also interesting. As you mentioned, you started as a medical technologist and then a marketing officer and then to translation and consecutive interpreting and then the booth. So the question that I'm going to ask you, perhaps after I listen to Carla about her beginning, is about how that road, you were like a snowball picking up skills and competencies from the different backgrounds and positions you have taken as a medical technologist, as a marketing officer, and then consecutive consecutive interpreting and translation. How they helped you shaping a fully fledged career in interpreting and helped you to be successful in this new métier, this new profession. But after, can you answer me after Carla? So Carla, tell us your story.
My introduction to this world of interpretation was actually quite an organic one also. I studied law. I was brought up in a bilingual home. My father, I was brought up in Mozambique for some of my childhood. My father Mozambican or Portuguese. My mother actually Lebanese, but English speaking. So we spoke Portuguese to my father, English to my mother. But that's not where my interest in languages arose, but obviously the seed was planted there. My interest was in law. So I studied law and I practiced for 20 years as a lawyer in South Africa. And then it came a time when Angola, after the Civil War, opened its trade to the outside world. And I was requested to translate complex agreements on mining concessions, on all the aspects of Angola's external commerce. And then I was asked by my law firm to do also liaison and consecutive interpreting at meetings, at business meetings. I went to Angola a few times to interpret as a lawyer, but also to facilitate the meetings between the various parties in English and Portuguese. And also a personal crisis took place, and that made me relook at my career. And at the same time that I started fermenting this love for languages. Oh, by the way, in one of my majors at university was French. So already I had sort of an inkling of what it could be like. And slowly I started getting introduced to this world of first consecutive interpreting. Then somebody invited me to do a big conference for the... Nobody ever rings the bell. Look what's happening now. I was invited to do the Anglican annual conference in South Africa as content. Invited only to a simultaneous booth, and I absolutely loved it. It felt as if I'd been there forever. I'm not sure if it was because of the propensity of the ease that I found in speaking, you know, as all women do. We found it very easy to speak. But, and then sort of organically through some trainings, through some workshops, but mainly through just going to the booth and concentrating and doing your job. And learning, you know, about the subject. So it took me about 7 years to wind up my legal practice. until I eventually said goodbye to it and started this path of interpreting as a full-time. That's my story.
Yeah. So what attracted you to this new profession, and why you have favored it? Just you abandoned another profession in law, and some lawyers sometimes they gain fortunes, and then moving into language and conference interpreting. So what are the advantages that you have seen in this new profession?
It was a number of elements. So my particular field of expertise in law was litigation. And as you probably know, litigation has a sell-by date in terms of the unrelenting pressure that it poses on people. So yes, I could have carried on as a litigation lawyer. I would have been a nervous wreck. I would have had a huge mansion. I would never have seen my son. I would be eating from a plastic container where I just apply heat to my food. So when I say that there was a personal crisis, I took it very seriously, and I thought, do I actually want to do this until I'm 75, parking in the same parking lot, catching the same lift, dealing with people's problems, solving them, fighting every single day of my life, not only with the opposition, with the judge, and also with the clients when you present the bill? Or do I want to go to a conference, repeat what people say in a different language, not have to make up anything myself and get paid for it, have enough time with my son, cook him a good meal, get to travel, and have a smaller house, and not park in the same parking lot and catching the same lift? So I had to take all of those factors into account. And also the feeling of when you come to an end of a conference and you can close that file and say goodbye to it, not have to revisit it again until you get to another conference where the nature of or the theme is similar, was also very appealing to you. Because as a lawyer, you're dealing with the same problems year in and year out, and those files never seem to close. And I noticed recently that people are starting to talk about attorneys' breakdowns or something. Anyway, it's something that I managed to avoid. I saw the signs. I always told my friends that if you see me twitching with an eye like this, then it's time to leave the profession. And a colleague of mine said, you know what, you were walking down that passage, you were twitching. So I didn't want to be a twitcher. I became an interpreter. The opportunity was given to me, so
okay,
I was lucky. I was very lucky.
You are. I've noted that in your statement, you have mentioned a few words pertaining to home and that space. You mentioned that you were raised in a bilingual home, bilingual family, and you mentioned home. You mentioned son, cooking, and so on. I want to ask you about the impact of home on your profession, especially the bilingualism that you have lived. Did it have any impact on your career and your final decision to opt for this new profession? This is the first question. And the second question is, from home, you will have good networks outside and friends. And I know that you and Addie are very good friends, and you are sharing booth. So she is your booth partner. To tell us how that affinity in the booth can help the team of interpreters perform better. But after listening to Addie, the question that I've asked earlier about you like a snowball picking up skills and competencies all the way, you take to conference interpreting. I don't know whether it is your final destination or not, but I think that it is your final destination. So tell us that story of a snowball.
Well, so in 2000, I started interpreting full-time, simultaneous interpreting mostly. And as you know, a little bit different from Europe is the fact that here in South Africa, we are jacks of all trades. It's not a market that lends itself to specialization. You sort of are thrown into the deep end and told to swim. So that's also good for experience because you have to work double hard because it's a variety of subjects, financial, political. Of course, that was also the time of HIV and AIDS, new terminology. There was a lot of new laws, new legislation, and I remember projects that I did for 5 years, for instance, one single project on water resources within the SADC region, where the Angola, of course, was the country with the most water, and how the other countries around it used and profited and traded with that water, how it affected the other countries. So you go on from one subject to another, you pick up terminology, and of course, because you have done 3 or 4 conferences or 5, you then are in the project because you've already got the terminology, you've already in the subject. And then in 2005, I had a very interesting project which lasted 5 years also. The maritime laws changed all over the world. And so they changed in Angola too, which is a country, of course, it's one of the richest countries, one of the richest countries in oil resources, diamonds, minerals, but mostly the oil industry, the oil and gas is very, very important in Angola. So when the maritime laws changed, they had to train all the people on board these ships, and not only ships, but all types of vessels that serve the rigs, that serve the ports, that all the laws changed, and every single person, whether you were a deckhand or an officer or a hairdresser or a cook, these people had to be trained on first aid and survival at sea. And the very first, so before I say that, so the officers, the top, the most qualified employees as such, went to Portugal because Angola was no longer a colony, but of course it's still, Portuguese is the official language, they still have the relations, the trade, and the officers were then trained in Portugal. But the deckhands, the cooks, all the other stuff came to South Africa, to Cape Town, which was the only accredited college for such, was Cape Town. And the very first meeting of these students fell on my lap. I was asked to interpret, and the stars were so aligned because these people know no language except Portuguese, sometimes not very good. Their level of instruction is sometimes very, very low, sometimes non-existent, sometimes a bit better. But it was, for me, it was an unbelievable project, because not only could I tell them about first aid and artificial breathing and all kinds of things, but I could digest it for them into a way that they could understand. And it was an unbelievable time. So for 5 years I did that. regularly, almost weekly, sometimes monthly, but we trained everybody, so that in the end I had to, I had to translate the exams. I had to be there when they did the exams. I had to help mock the exams. I did, and of course I did all the practical too. I jumped off ship into the sea. I went with them into the helicopters, into the what you call it, the
parachute,
not the parachutes, but as barcassas, what is
lifeboats.
It? Lifeboats, into the lifeboat. So I knew exactly how to survive. I knew exactly how to paint a ship on the outside with all the security, and firefighting. I mean, I learned to fight a fire like the best of them, except that I could almost not lift the hose. It was so heavy. So I had incredible feedback from these people that were so grateful that you didn't just tell them, here it is, it's angina pectoris, and you must learn this, blah, 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 and you must recognize the signs, and this is shock, and what is shock? Shock for them is when you go to the shop and the food is too expensive. But you have to explain to them that it is called shock, but it doesn't mean the shock of bad news. So it was that for me was an incredible experience. And there was my medical technology background put to use. So much so that I got level 3 myself in first aid firefighting, and I never finished because I had no time to go into an ambulance, but I never finished. But you learn and you give. That for me was an incredible experience. And then the rest, I have been involved in projects of standards, for instance, on medical laboratories and equipment for medical laboratories, that where I could always help. I could always say, okay, but let's say it like that. Or I was involved in other projects with malaria when, there were some new drugs, and I traveled into Africa with those new drugs, or and so it was always, in one way or another, it follows me. But yeah, and I did a lot of translations on HIV programs for the radio, for the television. So somehow it's never very far from me, that part of my work. But it's gone far too. I've been, you learn all kinds of new things and new terminology. For me, that's the fascination of interpreting, what you learn, and not only what you do, but what you learn when we know things that other people don't hear, that other people don't read, because it goes through our hands so much, so many things. Some of them, of course, a lady shouldn't have to read. I mean, some terminology, financial, technical, I think, my goodness, but it's all part of the experience. Yeah.
Excellent. So it is a learning process. Let's call it a learning life. I'm going to ask you later about your learning life and the lessons you have drawn from it. And I would like to kindly ask you to summarize that in sort of tips to novice interpreters and students of interpreting, and especially the challenges that you have faced all along this your experience in this life, in this 25 years of career. So I turn now to you, Carla. You have just helped Addie finding a word, lifeboat. I would like to ask you about working as a team in the booth and the affinity between the two interpreters. So, but before that question related to home and how your home has impacted your performance, has had an impact on your performance and made you more successful in the market and as a conference interpreter with the skills. So I'm worried about time. We have still almost 8-9 minutes left in this interview with you before we open it up to the participants so that they can ask questions as well. So can you please respond in 1 or 2 minutes? Thank you.
Very briefly, I'm going to tell you that actually my initial objective was to spend more time with my son. Didn't really pan out to be like that, because when you start traveling, you spend less time at home, and the time that you do spend at home is very concentrated. So that aspect of, spending sort of a week where you're at home and you can be there when the child comes home from school, and that is beautiful. But the time when, how we live as interpreters, we live in a box, and then when somebody presses that button and says, well, tomorrow you have to be in Swaziland, you have to be in Swaziland. So the home life becomes disrupted. So you have to apply some systems for the smooth turning of the home life to continue. It was at times, it wasn't what I envisaged, and I had to make some very hard decisions of often not accepting some long-term assignments or 2-week assignments, or even 1 week followed by another week of interpretation conferences, because it means that I would be away from home for a long time. Always having a connection with your son to see, is he ready for me to go again? He's going through a bit of a tough time. So as a woman, and for those women out there, it is something that you need to really take into account and consider, and take the advice of other women. So one interpreter gave me very, very good advice. She said to me, one thing that I've got one rule: I do not miss important events. So if there's an award ceremony at school where the child is going to receive 25 golden medals because of most improved or the best bowler at cricket or whatever, you do not miss that event. It doesn't matter how lucrative or how advancing it may be in your career, that is the one that you're going to say no to. So for the woman out there, it's always very difficult. That dilemma is always there, more so than in law, I would say. So that was a big surprise for me. But it's also an indication that your career has moved to a certain standard and that you are doing well. You've finally been acknowledged. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Hammouda.
It does. Thank you. Back to you, Addie. So your experience, 25 years of experience. So what are the lessons that you have drawn from that life?
Well, the lessons mostly is that you have to be prepared to accept you have to be prepared to compromise. In our region where we work, with the big organizations, SADC, African Union, Pan-African Parliament, it's and the conference world in itself, it's new as such. It's everybody learns all the time. So we deal with documentation is a big problem. Documentation that doesn't arrive. Topics that are not communicated. Then there is also you arrive at the conference, you barely know what the conference is about. You haven't received an agenda, you haven't received the documentation, and you approach the organizers and we need it. And there are perceptions from the part of speakers. No, but it's confidential. I cannot part with it. I do not want, but we need to know what you're talking about. So we deal with challenges in that respect. It's a big one. It's always been a big one. You learn to deal with it in the best way you can. You look for old conference papers, you look for previous meetings, what was talked about, so that you get an idea. And of course, in this region also we have to deal with different accents, different levels of instruction. I have four.
Let me interrupt you here. What is the most difficult accent in that region that you really?
Well, I must tell you, Hammouda, in South Africa we have 11 official languages. 11.
Wow.
So that should tell you something already.
So what are they? Just can you name 4 or 5 most?
4 or 5. English and Afrikaans, you know,
yes.
And as you know, if you know a little bit of the history of South Africa, there is a lot of politics involved in our languages as well, because English and Afrikaans was truly the language of the oppressor during the apartheid.
But do you speak Afrikaans yourself?
Well, I understand it. I mean, you do speak it. Yeah, I speak it to get myself in trouble and out of trouble. But
so it is the trouble-related language.
Yeah. No, I don't think you can fool me when you speak Afrikaans. I know what's going on. I might, you know, there are levels of Afrikaans in this country. There are very high levels of Afrikaans, which I don't think I will ever reach. But with my languages that I speak, and I need to tell you, you understand it. You are also a multilingual speaker. You understand that. I feel that if you can find the humor in a language, that's when you really truly understand a person, a people. And I feel that when I could tell a joke in Afrikaans and make everybody laugh, that for me was a big sign. So I do understand it. I helped my children throughout school with their Afrikaans exercises. I have a daughter who got a prize for Afrikaans in high school. So it's part of this culture. But there was, when I arrived, a big resentment. The Afrikaans people did not want to speak English, and the English people did not want to speak Afrikaans. But that was personal. It was general. People had this resistance. So in 1994, when there was a big change, Mandela became our president, when everything changed, then of course there was this other issue of so many indigenous languages. Which one are we going to pick? So we picked 9. Of course, Zulu, Xhosa, Venda, Sesotho. There are.
How about Portuguese? How about Portuguese?
No, not Portuguese. No, not.
So let me ask you this. So Portuguese, and you are perhaps coming from the white community of Europe, like the Dutch and the English. So how are you perceived in South Africa, whether you are from the oppressor or the oppressed or somewhere in between?
No. I am now a true South African. I nationalized in 1987, but this year is 45 years I've been in this country, and my English is, of course, South African.
So
English.
I don't mean you in person, but the people who have roots from Portugal, like both of you.
Oh, you must understand, the Portuguese community in South Africa is very, very big and very important, always has been. And so the majority, not anymore like that, because of the different phases the world has gone through. But in the very beginning, 50, 60 years ago, 70 years ago even, the Portuguese came to South Africa to labor, to work, because they came, you know, during our dictatorship in Portugal. Portugal was a poor country, people were poor, so they immigrate. You know, Portugal is still one of the biggest immigrating, probably the biggest in the world. And so people immigrated everywhere, mostly to France, to Canada, and some of the other European countries, Switzerland, Luxembourg, I mean, so, but also to South Africa. And so these people came to work, and they mostly opened grocery shops, which were very, very popular. And 50 years ago, it was because in South Africa during the apartheid, all the shops closed at 5 in the afternoon. But the Portuguese little shops stayed
Because
open
of
until 11.
Sorry, due to criminality?
No. It was due to the mostly religious. It was very Calvinistic country, and so it was Monday to Friday from 8 to 5, and Saturday till 1 o'clock, and Sunday nothing. You don't drink, you don't see a movie, nothing opened. When I arrived here, you couldn't get a cup of coffee anywhere. Of course, it's changed completely. But so there is quite a bit of politics involved in our languages. So today in Parliament, you have 11 booths because you have 11 languages, and then you have the international languages, Portuguese.
But it's very good environment for interpreters to find jobs in both.
Yeah.
Excellent. So
yes, in the national languages,
yeah, national. So again, with the lessons that you have drawn.
Well, you learn the lessons is that you cannot be too demanding, especially as an interpreter that wants to make it as a career. You need to understand where you come from and understand where the client is coming from. And you have to make a lot of allowances. You have to understand what you are dealing with. And it's not always easy, and it makes your job a lot more difficult, but it also makes it a lot more challenging.
Can you give us one concrete example on how you strike that balance between your needs, the client's needs, and what you want, and what does the client want? How to strike that balance? Can you think of a situation, for example? Or both of you, of course. Yeah, please go ahead.
Addie will know that my favorite saying is that we as interpreters, we are bottom feeders. In the hierarchy of importance in the conference, we are bottom feeders. So on the one hand, it's not time for us to go screaming and shouting at the conference organizers, where my documents, where's my... We've got to roll with the punches. If we don't have documents, you go to the booth, you do the best possible that you can, because the participants don't care about what's happened inside the politics of the organization in organizing this conference. They want to hear the content of the conference coming through their ears in the language that they understand, and that is what you do. So that is, on the one hand, a lot of interpreters are prima donnas. They refuse to interpret because of this, because of that. I say you get into the booth and you interpret as best possible, because it's not the delegate's fault. On the other hand, and simultaneously, and this can be done in parallel, you educate the conference organizers as much as possible. You start putting pressure on them from the time that they give you that assignment, from the time that you sign the contract. If the contract does not include the fact that failure to provide us with adequate documentation does not guarantee a professional service, you've got to put that clause in as best as possible, so to cover yourself. But when that bell goes and it's your time to interpret, you interpret. You don't switch off your microphone and say, well, I didn't get the documents, I don't know what you guys are talking about, blah, blah, blah. So we're the bottom feeders on the one hand for the vis-a-vis the delegates, and on the other hand, we are the educators of the conference organizers. So I think we have a dual role that. I'm not sure.
Thank you. Okay, so it's time, ladies and gentlemen, to show hands if you'd like to ask questions or raise other questions and make comments to our two guests. But please, can you specify to whom the question goes? So I can see now 3 hands shown. I will take them as a first round, and then I'm going to take a second round. Ayman Tarhouni, Daad Matmati, and Afef Boujama'a. We take them as a first round, and then I will give you the floor to answer later. Ayman, please go ahead.
Hello, and thank you for your for sharing your experiences. They were very insightful. So my questions are going to be actually try to help me work on my thesis. So I'm going to ask you the following questions. How do you deal with conflicts when interpreting? So do you interpret...
Sorry.
How do you deal with conflicts?
When interpreting?
Conflict.
Yes.
Yeah.
So do you interpret them faithfully or do you resort to self-censorship? And during your years of experience, and my questions are to both of you, during your years of experience, did you notice that male interpreters censor themselves more than female interpreters? And the last question is, do you have any norms or guidelines that you follow when interpreting or translating conflicts or taboo words that may occur? That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ayman. Daad Matmati.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you, Mrs. Salhi and Mrs. Morgado, Mrs. Pinheiro for being with us today. Since you are both female interpreters, my question is to both of you. It is about a gender bias in politeness. I have read about the different approach between men and women to impoliteness or politeness, saying that women's language is perceived as more polite, such as indirect requests and euphemisms, while men use neutral to strong language or even taboo expressions. To what extent is that true for you, and what is your opinion about that? And thank you.
Thank you, Daad. Afef Boujama'a.
Hello, thank you for this nice and fruitful conversation. So my first question is for Carla, Mrs. Carla. I think that your career as a lawyer helped you in the field of interpreting. So is it right that it did help you? Because interpreting requires the skills of public speaking and active listening that you got used to them as a lawyer, I think. And my other questions for both of you, Mrs. Addie and Mrs. Carla, how do you deal with pressure in this small box, and what other competencies and skills are required to succeed? And do you think that an interpreter
Afef, you are muted. Can you unmute your mic, please? We lost you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
So my last question was, what do you think? How do you think interpreters should choose a field of specialty? Do you think that interpreters should choose a field of specialty or not? Thank you so much.
Thank you. The floor is yours, dear guest speakers.
Right. First, we're going to deal, and I think how we can do it is I will answer as best I can, and then we can help each other as if we're in the booth.
Yeah.
So, Ayman, you asked with regard to conflict interpreting. I just want to understand from you, when you talk about conflict interpreting, is the subject of conflict, in other words, a political or socio-political subject, or is the whole, the plenary, in conflict? In other words, speakers, point of order, some walking out, the chair throwing his gavel down. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it means micro or macro context of conflict.
It's more micro. When it comes to the people you are translating for, they start insulting each other. They start using foul language. How you as an interpreter, how do you deal with that? Do you interpret all of that faithfully and just ignite more fire, or just try to calm things down?
Look, I mean, it's
of peace.
very interesting. it's a very interesting question, that because on the one hand, you cannot have delegate so-and-so calling delegate X calling delegate Y, all sorts of names that we shouldn't repeat, and then you say, Mr. So-and-so, you are such a silly character, etc., etc. In the meantime, his face is going like this and the flames are coming out of his head, because that will just be too comical. So you have to convey, but no, not to ignite more, but be true to what the person is conveying. I find that in situations like that, and normally it's in parliamentary situations, that the interpreter is saved by the very conflict. Why do I say that? Because in a conflict situation, they are all screaming at each other so much that you are entitled to, as an interpreter, to say, this is the interpreter speaking. The interpreter is unable to interpret so many voices coming through. So like that, you just distance yourself, and then of course it's up to the chair to take over and to either mute those delegates, because in situations like that they do have the power to do so, or to bring them to order. So I haven't found, and maybe Addie can talk about her experience, but I haven't found that in all my years of interpreting I've come across a lot of those situations. But it is quite nice for an interpreter also to be able to say, you imbecile, and to say it with as much vigor as the person has said it. Because, you know, you've been buffered by your role. So there are, yes, some boundaries, but you also have to stay true to the interpretation. And when that bell goes to save you from it, you take that first chance and escape. That would be my contribution to you. Emin, I don't know if
No,
I'd like to.
I agree mostly. I agree.
Do you?
I just don't repeat swear words. But otherwise, you have to be true to the interpretation. You have to more or less convey. But in these cases, you don't need to convey. It's right there. People are fighting. People are screaming. So everybody can see what's going on. And very often we have the delegate on our ear that says, don't worry, don't talk, I want to hear them. So, you know, very often that also happens. And then you are saved in a way when the delegate says, don't worry, I want to hear them. And it's then, you know, that's how
But
it goes.
another question that you have raised, Carla, about the visibility and the invisibility of the interpreter. The interpreter is most of the time in the hiding in that box, but making his voice heard, this is the voice of the interpreter.
Yes.
So there is a heated debate on that, whether the interpreter should be visible in the interpreted event and making himself visible, and some other people, they argue, no, this is not a sound methodology, and the interpreter is a passive carrier of meaning. What is said should be translated, otherwise keep silent. So how do you react, both of you, perhaps, to this?
It is a fine line. It's a fine line, but so I don't believe that an interpreter should jump into the arena. Definitely not. But there are some times when you are not able to discharge your duties and your responsibility as an interpreter. And at that time, this is when you say, this is the voice of the interpreter. I'm not able to interpret during this debate. There are too many sounds coming at me, too many voices coming at me. That is for you to discharge your responsibility as an interpreter. I would say that other than that, you are just lending your voice to the speaker, and you should always be invisible. Yeah. I follow that, unless they come and ask for your help or to be more visible, but never your personal opinion.
And can you act as a consultant in this case? If you are asked about something cultural, for example, how to say it, how to make a statement that is not culturally offensive, for example, would you go the extra mile to offer that service?
No, personally, I wouldn't. I don't think that our job spec and our responsibility takes us to that level. No, I wouldn't.
Thank you. Yeah. Please, can you carry on with the other questions?
The other question was male interpreters, do they censor more than female interpreters? I must tell you, I have no idea. I don't think it's a gender thing. I think it's an individual thing. I think it depends on how comfortable you are in repeating expletives or how you mentally and emotionally feel about interpreting that. So it's a very interesting question. I can tell you that I will take it if I'm ever back into the interpreting world, when it opens up, I will take it up with my male colleagues. Then norms for taboo words. Like Addie says, there are some words that there is no need to be repeated. And in fact, again, we are saved by the fact that a lot of the expletives are universal. And I think that even in Arabic, I can understand some Arabic expletives. So you can just leave those beep, beep words out for them to sort it out themselves. And you can also say something, you know, the interpreter, I think,
you can repeat it in a non-swear word. That's what I do. I mean, if somebody swears heavily in a conference, I don't repeat those words. I either explain that they are swearing at each other, or you use words that are not expletives. You know, it's just, I don't repeat the swear words. That's on principle. That's me.
So do you also, in this case, you make yourself heard by acting like a commentator, commenting on? Yes, they are.
Not so much as a commentator.
Yeah.
I try to remain as an interpreter without having, for as long as I can. Sometimes the debate or the discussion or the fight, which is sometimes what it is, goes in such a way that you can't understand one or the other. You have to stop. But if you can go on, I will go on, but without repeating. I mean, there is always, I feel that people, I always told my kids, if you have to swear, you don't have good enough vocabulary. So there is always another word you can use instead of a swear word. So, yeah.
Good.
But then I guess the debate is, then you're not being true to the interpretation. Because if somebody is calling Delegate Y the worst name in the world, and you're saying that maybe his eyebrows should be plucked more often than before.
No, but you can say he's insulting his mother and he's insulting his, you know, that is what I do.
You have to be creative.
He goes on, now he's insulting his mother. You know, you don't have...
Or he's using animal names for you, sir.
No, but I mean, you can convey the message without being crude.
Good.
So let's take another round of questions. I can see.
Sorry,
so there is another question. Yes, go ahead, please.
Dad. Was it Dad?
Dad, yes, Dad, yes.
Gender bias and men that use taboo expressions are women more polite. Dad, do you feel that we've already answered that in the previous debate?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And then there's, is it Afel? I can't read my writing. Afel Bujema?
Yeah, Afef Bujema.
Afef, I beg your pardon. Yeah. Afef, you suggested that my career as a lawyer helped me in interpreting. Absolutely, yes. In terms of the capacity to learn, the capacity to absorb, the capacity to concentrate, the capacity not to be scared of a microphone. There's a lot of people that speak English and Portuguese a lot better than me, but you put them in front of a microphone and they start stuttering and they run. So yes, my career as a lawyer, also a capacity to be incisive about certain subjects. Yes, it did help me. And then for the both of us, Afef, and I'm sorry that I'm rushing, but I think, Hammouda, you're running a bit out of time.
Yeah.
About the pressure in the small box. Well, Addie and I, we really like working together because we like a bicycle in tandem, you know, we work well together. But if you're working with an interpreter, and that was going to be actually my topic, is about the intimacy and the behavior in a small booth, who has certain ways or certain ways that doesn't follow the rules and is not professional, then that can cause a lot of pressure for you. So you got to learn to actually draw an invisible curtain between you and that interpreter and just concentrate, because as you know, we are like centipedes. When you start interpreting, 100, 1 million legs are moving all at the same time, and you cannot get interrupted. You cannot even find out, is it the front leg that's moving? Because the minute you think that thought, you will stop. So you need one pointed concentration. And if there's a booth partner that's going to add more pressure to that one pointed concentration, you're not going to discharge your duty as a professional adequately. Should we choose a field of speciality? I ask you not to, because you will be depriving yourself of wonderful variety of subjects out there. As Hammouda said, it is a forever learning experience. So yes, of course you can. And if there's a subject that you love so much, then choose that as your speciality. But you'll be depriving yourself of work, and you'll be depriving yourself of the immense capacity to learn that is out there through others, which is one of the gifts that we have in this profession. Addie, I don't know if you want to...
Yes, I agree. I agree. I think that in countries, well, in Europe in general, where you can specialize in one topic, and if that is possible and if that gives you a comfortable way of living, I think it's okay, because you can really be very, very good at that specific topic without having to worry. But I also agree. I am happy that I have been an interpreter in Africa for, a translator for more than almost 28 years, but as an interpreter for the best of 25 years with such a variety of subjects, because today I know which ones I like more, which ones I dislike completely, but we try our best every time because we have no choice. And that's
what are the subjects that you like more?
I beg your pardon?
What are the subjects that you like more?
Social issues I love.
Like trade unions and so on?
also.
By the way, our meeting was on
was trade unions.
Trade unions, yes.
So that organization,
that was
I've been
in 2007, I think, or 2006.
2006, I think. But
yeah.
I have been working with them since 1996.
Wow.
So they have been
10 years earlier.
And today I have a better idea how it goes. Oh yes, I've enjoyed that.
And this helped you also, I think, get the jargon, the comrade jargon. And
absolutely. And I still work for them, as I told you. I still do translations for the office in Switzerland. And sometimes, and of course, because it's Switzerland, it's also for the unions in Portugal. Yeah. Whereas mostly I would work for the unions in Angola and Mozambique here. So, and it changes. And sometimes I get a little note that says we need more, especially me and the Spanish translators, we need more union jargon, which would be a little bit different for Africa and for Portugal. You see, so even that is interesting. You have to keep in mind that you must make it understood to the Portuguese unionists and the African, Mozambican, Portuguese-speaking unionists. So yeah,
can you dwell a little bit on that difference between that jargon in Portugal and Spain, Europe, and in Africa? So in what way can you make that difference more visible to the student?
There isn't a difference. There isn't a difference in the language. There is a slight nuance, but in local regionalisms, local things, because you must understand very often we also have the indigenous languages lending words to the language. So they become, you know, like in Portugal too. Now, I mean, which saddens me tremendously is the amount of English words that they choose to the Portuguese language. So, but in the other sense, the language is exactly the same as Portugal and the Portuguese-speaking colonies is exactly the same. Brazil, of course, has got some, the language is the same, the spelling and the writing is slightly different. So I will do translations for Brazil, but I will do them the Portuguese way. But if they want only for Brazil, then somebody else that is Brazilian will do it. So, but the language is exactly the same, but we have certain spelling differences, like English American and British American. I beg your pardon, British English and American English, where you have neighbor without a U or words like that, and it's the same in Portugal. Yeah.
So
but
what
Addie,
what I meant was particularly the culture-specific words. I remember when I was a younger interpreter, it was in Tunis, and it was a trade union meeting, and the first time I heard the word, and really it was an eye-opener for me just to learn more. It was amandla, and all the participants, they started shouting amandla, and how to translate it, I don't know the word, and really whether it is an English word that I don't know, and really this impacted my self-confidence that perhaps this is an English word that I don't know, and really this impacted me heavily. So I meant those sorts of words that are very specific to the South African. It is a word for struggle, and I should have learned about it. I didn't expect that I will be faced by that challenge, and that I need to learn more about that.
But words for yes, I understand your question. Words for like a mandala, for instance, you don't translate, because a mandala has become a universal word. So you do not translate. And I find it also very interesting sometimes, not anymore, but in the beginning when I...
Sorry, Addie, you are saying so because you know it, that it is international. But for a junior interpreter, he has no clue about it. And he doesn't know that it should not be translated. So this is the type of challenges that you might be faced with.
That is true.
That's when you need a booth partner to quickly go Google Amandla, South Africa, blah, 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 and then say, no, don't interpret that. That's when the relationship between you and the booth partner has got to be good. So, and you can't expect Hammouda to know, you can't expect to know everything as an interpreter, particularly when you're going into such a foreign arena as the arena of politics of another country. So you will be excused for not shouting out Amandla into the microphone, and hopefully you'll have a good booth partner to tell you what it means.
And I was just going to say, very interesting that not only in Africa, and I've already heard it in other countries, but a luta continua, which is the struggle continues. And now in South Africa, they say it in Portuguese, So it's very interesting too that it was adopted in Portuguese.
Yeah, even the jargon of using comrade instead of Mr. So-and-so, like comrade is, and we have in Arabic,
very much trade union.
Yes.
Very much trade union, very much always comrade. And but in South Africa, our favorite word in conference is illustrious. Illustrious, minister illustrious, so
Hammouda, can I just add here that
please, yes,
the issues that you've raised here show you how versatile we have to be and how we need to learn not only the nuances of a language, but also the nuances of a movement, of a country, of a people, of a culture. And that is what makes our job so beautiful. And the other day I learned a new word.
What was it?
Polymath. Polymath. A person who's a polymath. And I think that we are all polymaths. A polymath is a savant, a Renaissance person who knows every subject. So we're not jack of all trades. We actually know a lot about a lot of subjects. So we are, and we use all the knowledge that we acquire through our profession to make decisions in our lives. So that is the beautiful dance that our profession has, external and internal, for our own growth. So I think all of you can pat yourselves on the shoulder and say that you're all polymaths. You're learning every single conference, every single day, so much more than the ordinary person. Sorry to call them ordinary, but people that don't have access to so much.
True. Thank you. Let's take another round of questions, and then perhaps I will hand it over to you, Carla, to speak more about the intimate space of the booth. So, Taqwa Jandoubi and Wisal Khalifi. Taqwa.
Hello, Mrs. Addie and Mrs. Carla. It's very an honor to have you here today. So my question is, since you both work together, can you tell us about the importance of having a mate in a booth? And did you find sometimes in some moment that it's better for you to work solo? And actually, since I feel like Mr. Carla somehow answered my question, I'm gonna add a little detail. Is it a good thing or a bad thing to have a mate in a booth who you are close to and you already know before that conference? And thank you.
Thank you. Wisal?
It is such a pleasure to have both Mrs. Carla and Sadie. And thank you so much for such practical tips and insights. You almost have answered all of my questions already. So when your booth partner gets anxious and overwhelmed and starts losing it, what do you do to overcome the situation? And if it was up to you to pick a booth partner, who would you go for in terms of criteria and qualifications and trust and so on? Because when I see the harmony you both share, it makes me want to have that kind of bond with my future booth mate. And thank you.
Thank you. Abir Alwi?
Good afternoon. Thank you for this insightful meeting. My question is for both of you doctors, Addie and Carla. I want to know what are the opportunities that will be there for interpreters or for novice interpreters or experienced working exclusively online in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, ladies.
Okay. Taqwa, I think your question was the first one, the importance of having a mate in the booth before a conference. Yes, I tell you, sometimes you don't have a choice. In fact, most of the time you don't have a choice. It depends on the conference organizer. But what I can tell you is that when I know that it's Addie who's going to work with me, then already half the pressure is gone. And sometimes it's not Addie, and I'm just talking about my personal experience.
When it is Hammouda working with you, the same booth.
No, then
how
we're
about your pressure?
Very forward to it. But we will never work in the same booth, Hammouda, unless I learn Arabic very quickly.
Yeah, I will try to invoke your Arabic roots from Lebanon.
Yes.
Because we do have roots also from Lebanon.
Yes.
And you know the story, yeah.
So it does definitely makes a difference to have somebody who you get on with, somebody who you know is going to help you. You know, even the night before that we get the conference, if I haven't had time to look at documents, I haven't had time to compile a glossary, all I do is phone Addie. Addie, can you do it? But yes, of course I'll do it. Then we'll meet a little bit before, we'll go through the glossary. And that's teamwork. And teamwork has got one result, and that is the delegates are going to be happy and you're going to get more work. So it's all positive. And also with regard to behavior in the booth, she's used to me sitting cross-legged on the chair. I'm used to some of her mannerisms. So we're very comfortable like that, because as you know, it's a very confined, very intimate space. It makes a huge difference. Unfortunately, you cannot always choose your booth partner, but you can always talk to your booth partner when you go into the booth and come to an agreement as to how you're going to behave. Disclose to your booth partner what your little idiosyncrasies are. See if the booth partner is going to accept them or not, and expect the same respect from your booth partner. When you're overwhelmed, asks Vissal, what do? Well, if I've got Addie, I'm never going to be overwhelmed. But even if I am overwhelmed, take over. She will take over. If I get a coughing fit, she knows immediately. She switches on because she's been listening. So it's a smooth transition.
And vice versa.
And vice versa. Yeah. So there's very little scope for being overwhelmed when you have a good relationship with a booth partner. Not all of you are going to maybe have that opportunity of working with somebody that you know and works well with you. But if you act out of kindness and respect towards your booth partner, there is very little room that leaves your booth partner to act in a contrary manner. So just be courteous, be considerate, and when your booth partner is overwhelmed, then show a response. Write the words down, or perhaps ask him or her before going to the booth, how do you like to work? Do you want me to write words down when you get stuck on one? Because a lot of people don't. It distracts them a lot. So little tips, you know, you're going to work with people that have their own idiosyncrasies, their own way of talking. So communication before you start working in the booth will lead to a good booth relationship with whoever you're with.
Can I just add, there is one thing that upsets me actually professionally. We change every half hour. And so very often your booth colleague chooses to leave the booth, which is okay. But I always do, I don't always get it, but I expect that you are back in the booth at least 5 minutes before you have to go in, so that when we change over, it goes completely without a problem. It irritates me a lot when I have now just switched off my microphone and your colleague takes another 30 seconds to pick up, and in the meantime a lot has been lost. That for me is a lack of professionalism and self-respect, I think, to a point. That mostly if we are overwhelmed, and not only overwhelmed, but when there are subjects, when there are conferences, that it's best not to leave the booth, because already that your colleague is going to need some help, provided that she accepts that help. Because I have worked with people who get extremely, I've had situations of real, true rudeness. You don't offer me a word. You don't do that. And it's terrible for you. I mean, you are just helping in the best, so you need to for me, I think if you come a few minutes before you have to pick up, so that at least you get what's going on and you can then smoothly, without a break, from one word to the other, your colleague takes over. For me, that's very important.
Addie, you are raising a very sensitive subject in the booth. By helping your booth partner, it is really a double-edged sword.
Yes.
In the sense that it might be used also as a weapon by your booth partner to sometimes distract you, to over use that help to distract you, especially if you are junior interpreter, and making you seem to the audience that you are not competent enough. So how are you dealing with that?
Oh, well, we don't, it's only between you and your colleague. The way we do it, you can, with me, it's also easy because when I get stuck with a word, I start going around and your colleague picks it up and writes the word. You can put your hand over it. I don't need it. I don't want it. But you never really put it in front of your colleague. And sometimes in that split second in the middle, you mute your microphone and you say the word, and the other one immediately picks it up. Now, we never make it that the client picks it up. It's not like that. But there are colleagues.
But if your booth partner and your colleague makes it deliberate to make the...
Yeah,
is it offensive? Do you take it as an offensive act?
Well, not offensive, because help is always welcome, but it's, if it's distracting, it's unprofessional because you want to concentrate, but you have to find the balance, Hammouda. You have to have a professional relationship with your colleague. Would you like me to help? And normally, sometimes the other colleague, not necessarily Carla, but they write it down quickly and you quickly look it up and you write it back. So you have to get that perfect symbiosis almost. It's like you have to be in tune. Yeah. And if your colleague doesn't like help, it's happened to me before. I was very upset because all you want to do is help, but you are not to help me. Then you leave the booth, you have to go to the toilet and you wash your hands, you come back and you're fresh to start again. So every situation, you pick it up as it gets given to you.
Carla, tell us more about the mic manners, how to deal with the mic when you are on mic and when you are off mic. So how is it still in the booth? Of course, yes, in the booth.
Of course. I think that's it's one of the it's my anyway, I can't find the word for it, but I'm very specific about it because Addie and I, we know how we deal with each other. But there are, for example, some people that are extremely noisy that do not realize how sensitive the mic is. They've never been actually a delegate putting the headset on and hearing every single, when you play with a pen like this, when your booth partner plays with a pen like this, it sounds like there's a little bomb going off inside the delegate's ears. And the person, your booth partner, doesn't even realize that they're doing it. When the booth partner is, for example, typing something, your peripheral vision is picking up. Your booth partner is now looking for something in her bag, and it's the noise. It sounds like there's the invasion of something or other in the. Not only does it disturb you as the interpreter with that one pointed concentration, but it also disturbs the delegates. So for me, what actually brought this to light was when I worked with a colleague who was very robotic. And even though she's not my preferred booth partner, in terms of what she showed me that day, was the perfect way to have a booth partner. She walked into the booth and she was like a robot. She just listened and she stared straight in front. She did not move. She did not blink. And that, you don't have to be like that. You don't have to be frozen like that. But those are perfect conditions for the interpreter. She didn't move. She didn't, because every movement, every little noise that happens next to you in such a confined space is going to be picked up by the microphone, and it's going to be picked up by your attention span. So the microphone has to be treated with a lot of respect.
How about the case of having an external mic, perhaps for the media, for a media outlet, or for streaming, live streaming, and it is there most of the time? I don't know whether you are working with streaming also or interpreting for streaming in the media like the radio or TV. They are bringing their own mic, for example, in the booth, or sometimes asking interpreters not to put or to turn off their mics. So you will be like having a big brother watching you all the time, and you are observing everything in the booth. And if you'd like to have a side conversation, you have to go outside the booth. Has this happened to you in the past?
I've never had that experience.
No,
Okay.
not really.
No, no.
Yeah. Excellent. So let's take two more questions.
Sorry, Hammouda, there was a further question from
Yes, sorry.
Louis. She asks, what are the opportunities for novice interpreters?
Yes, sorry, yeah. Yes, please go ahead.
Unfortunately, I'm an old school interpreter, but I believe, because I've been delving a little bit into this remote simultaneous interpreting and the platforms that are available there, I think it's fantastic. And I think that if you can get onto it and start training through the various platforms that are out there, like Kuduway and Ablio and all of that, you will have a lot of opportunities. It's going to launch you, it's going to launch you well. So yes, there's lots of
opportunities there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shaima Gizani and Mirvet Sabr. Hello, Mirvet. Shaima, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. So my question is for Addie. Earlier you mentioned in tips, you mentioned flexibility and you have to be prepared to compromise. What kind of compromises?
Thank you. Mirvet Sabr.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you so much once again, Hammouda. Carla.
Saint Phoebe.
By the way, Mirvet was one of our guest speakers. She already spoke to Encounters at the Shores of Translation. Yeah. Yes, please go ahead, Mirvet.
Thank you so much.
Can I not see you?
Thank you so much once again.
Mirvet?
Sorry?
Can I not see your beautiful face today?
But a very beautiful picture I can see in the booth.
It is beautiful. That's fine. Up to you.
I'm sorry because I'm not feeling very well. That's why I came late. I'm sorry.
No problem.
But
You're welcome.
I just joined. I'm sorry for being late. Thanks so much. And you don't know how much I feel so sorry that I wasn't here from the very beginning. Hopefully I will get the recording. But I just raised my hand to say thank you, Hammouda, thank you, Carla and Addie. And also to answer this question about having a microphone or live stream from the TV or the media.
Yeah.
The answer was that I've never been in this situation. My answer was that I've been to this situation for so many times. So yeah. And this is an extra pressure over the interpreter to deal with.
True.
Because you have no control whatsoever on this bloody microphone in the booth.
Yeah.
You know, you have someone who is really observing you all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, in that case, if you really want to deal or to talk to your booth mates, one of the solutions we used to do is to write down and scribble whatever you want to say.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, you have to be more careful. And Hammouda, I hope you will get me once again to talk about just working for media, because this is very important, and lots of conference interpreters will deal with this.
Yeah.
I will not take long time, but let's talk about that later.
Let's
Thank
talk
you,
about that later. Thank you very much for
Thank
your
you, Mervet. Thank you.
very nice visit, Mervet. Thank you very much. Yes, over to you again, ladies. If you have any other question you'd like to answer.
When we talk about you must be prepared to compromise, in our case, in our situation, we have to be prepared to work without documentation, without preparation, and still do the best we can. More and more, because it was in the past, it was really difficult. Sometimes you got the title, because we say to the client, if you give me the subject, the topic, we can at least do some research, and even that sometimes isn't forthcoming. But more and more we are adding that clause to our contracts that says failure to provide documentation with some reasonable time. I mean, when I started work, all those years ago, we were given 2 to 3 weeks to prepare. We were given the documentation, which was good, and still we had to learn such a lot. So that is what I mean when you have to learn to compromise. You don't have a clue what the designations are. You put the time to prepare a glossary. So that is what I was talking about. And you also have to compromise with difficult colleagues, people that bring a lot of tension, a lot of stress into the booth. You somehow have to learn to work through that just by their sheer presence. You don't ask questions, you don't make small talk, you try the best you can to go through the day's work and take a deep breath at the end. I was talking in that sense. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Sir, your mic.
This is another problem with the mic, so it is the manners of and I think the problem has traveled also to the online meetings, keeping sometimes your mic off and forgetting that, and the help of the booth mate is crucial in this case, just to remind you, to observe you also. So we have discussed with our two distinguished guest speakers today the booth manners in that very intimate space, and we have they have, both of them, they have reported stories from their experience as international competent conference interpreters with years and years of experience. I know that they have so much to say about every single question asked, and they can think of so many incidents, events, stories that can support the tips and lessons they have reported and they have drawn through their life, professional life. Please join me in thanking the two guest speakers. I personally would like to thank them for accepting my invitation, and sometimes it is very important for the person just to do some detection. From the voice of the person, you can detect the character, and I think interpreters are very excellent agents in doing detection, to detect the character of the other, whether the person will be a good booth mate or not. They are very good interpreters. They are very good in reading body language, in reading voice, intonation, and so on and so forth. So I feel the warmth of your voices, and I can feel that we do belong to the same region. The roots are the same, which is, I mean, Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean. Portugal is not far away from that region. When I go to Lisbon, I really feel it's home. It is really home. And we have had the same ancient experiences. We have been fired from Spain, the Arabs, Muslims, and the Jews, as you mentioned earlier. We share so many things in common, and they can feel that. So, despite the fact that it is cold in Cape Town now, as you mentioned earlier, but still there is the warmth of the home that Carla has insisted on has been contagious, and we really captured that. They have spoken about their personal experiences in dealing with meaning and how to struggle with meaning, interpretation and meaning inferencing, and about their backgrounds and how their backgrounds in medicine and in law have helped them succeed in their new career, which is now almost an old career for the number of years they have been in the profession. I finally would like to extend my thanks to you and gratitude to you again, and I will give you the floor, each one of you perhaps for 30 seconds, to make some concluding remarks. You have the floor.
You know, Hammouda, this word virtual is actually the wrong word for this, because for me it felt like there was nothing really virtual about this. It felt like I was sitting in your space. I was sitting with Takwa, I was sitting with Fifi, I was sitting with Shaima, I was sitting with everybody, and we were just discussing it. So it's what a wonderful experience to be able to travel through the ether like this, and yet feel that we are still so physically present in each other's presence. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope that we've inspired the young new interpreters to go out there and lend their beautiful voices to cultures, to topics, to politics, to expletives, to everything. Just lend your voice and just make people understand each other. Thank you, Hammouda, for bring it together.
Welcome. You have inspired them indeed. You have, Addie.
Thank you. Thank you, Hammouda, for another opportunity, for being in my home again, and for bringing Carla to my home. She finds it very far to travel. I travel a lot easier to her place. So I was very pleased to have her here today. And thank you very much for listening to us, and good luck and Godspeed. It's really a wonderful profession, ours. And it is changing a lot in Africa, in South Africa. There are lots of people who want an easy way to make money as interpreters, and then they fall flat on their faces. So it is a wonderfully rewarding profession, but you need to work, you need to be true to yourself, you need to be a true professional, and you will make it. You will make it. It's a beautiful profession, and I wish you luck. Thank you, Hammouda.
You're welcome. You will make it. It is very good to end this conversation, this informed exchange, with this very positive note. You will make it. Let's keep hopeful. Thank you very much again. We have another opportunity to meet, and it is in almost 1 hour. So now it's 1 p.m. Tunis time, and I think it is 2 p.m. to Cape Town in South Africa. We have another encounter at the shores of translation. The language will be Arabic, and there will be another guest speaker who is a professor of Arabic literature and translation. Mr. and Professor Muhammad Quba will be speaking about issues related to literary translation. I will be meeting you there. Thank you very much, and bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.